Today I want to talk about something that every leather worker is going to have to address at some point in their journey, and more than likely this is the first or one of the first skills that you face when you make the decision to try leatherworking, and that's sewing. Almost every project that you do is going to involve taking one piece of leather and attaching it to another piece of leather, probably with some sort of stitches. Now, I started leatherworking back in college almost 20 years ago, before there was any real YouTube resources out there, and I didn't take the time to find a mentor like I should have. I didn't really reach out and communicate with people like I needed to skip some of the painful parts of my development as a leather worker. So I started pretty basic, but you know what, that's okay, because one of the myths that I'm going to dispel right away is that you need a tool like this to start building or doing leather craft projects. If that's your mindset going into this craft, you're probably too grumpy and take yourself a little too seriously to really enjoy leather craft. My first leather project was this holster that I built in college using some leather lace and a hole punch like this one. Now, I had saved up to buy a revolver, but I didn't save enough to also buy a holster. So I had a deficit between my needs and my means, and I decided to try and satisfy that with a skill set. And that was the birth of leathercraft in my life. Now, I guess you could say I didn't need the holster as much as I wanted it, but still a great motivator. So I took a trip down to the local farm and ranch store, found a bin full of leather scrap that included a little bit of leather lace, and I also found a hole punch much like this one, and was able to kind of devise a plan in my head to punch holes along the edge and stitch together this holster, including a leather loop on the back. And I think it turned out not too bad for my first leather project. So this project goes to show that you don't need fancy tools or even highly refined skills to construct something out of leather. You know what? Just save 35, 40 bucks, go down to your local supply store, find a leather hole punch, find some scrap leather, buy yourself a Snickers bar, and just go build some stuff and have a good time. The next tool in my leather stitching evolution is this stitching awl. And this is, I think this was called the Speedy Stitcher. There's a lot of different versions of this one. The idea is that you could take this awl and punch it through your layers of leather, and then you'll pull your thread all the way through, pull the awl back out but leave some thread on the other side, and then you can start going down the line and stitching. You'll push it through, pull it back out just enough to open up a hole or a loop for you to take the end of the thread, move it through, and then pull the awl back through the hole to get those two halves of your thread to loop together and hook just like a sewing machine would do. And you want that hook to end up in between the layers of leather, and you can move on down the edge of your workpiece in that manner. The problem is it's very difficult to go in a straight line. There are some ways you can improve your ability to do this by using something like this marking rotary tool. You can run this down the edge of the leather to put marks at specific intervals, and then you can try and pierce the leather on those marks to make your stitching straighter. That works pretty well. You can actually get some half-decent results with that method. I actually stitched an entire pair of chaps with this stitching tool before I realized that there was any better option out there. And it worked okay. It looks pretty good, actually still holding together today, maybe 15 years later. But knowing what I know now, I probably would have used a different tool for that project. I actually think of this more as a field repair tool. something that's easy to carry with you if you ever need to repair something in the field, some piece of gear. If you had this with you, that would be a very handy tool to be able to get some thread through some leather really fast, and it can go through some pretty thick pieces of leather. So I later discovered that there was a better way to sew, and that was with stitching irons or a stitching chisel. The first one that I used was something like this craft tool stitching chisel. It's painted black and it says 4mm, which is meant to be the spacing between the prongs, but the prongs on this tool are most definitely wider than 4mm. It is not precisely measured. You'll sometimes hear this referred to as a pricking iron, and most often when that term is being used, this tool is being used to make marks on the leather rather than pierce all the way through your workpiece for sewing. It can be used for both. More often now, it's a stitching chisel or stitching iron where you're piercing all the way through the workpiece and sewing. That was less common in the past and has become more common now. And when used in that way, it really does increase the rate at which you can sew. You're able to punch those holes pretty evenly along your workpiece and come back through with a needle and thread and put a saddle stitch in those holes, and it looks pretty nice and neat. So this was definitely an evolution for me that helped me increase my workflow, have more precision, make things look a little nicer. I was also able to add some more types of work to my repertoire. I was able to make some bags because I could put stitches in there a little bit faster. And I started making more knife sheaths that actually looked nicer. And I think the stitching is a lot more durable as well. So it was better as a better aesthetic and better quality in my opinion. And just a quick disclaimer, I'm not teaching anybody how to sew in this video. There's a ton of videos out there about saddle stitching. My main advice to you is just be consistent with how you saddle stitch. There's not really a wrong way to do it. You just put the threads through the holes. If you put them through the same way every time, your stitches are gonna look consistent, and that's the most important thing. I later found that there were better options than this craft tool painted stitching chisel. This thing, I mean, you can sharpen it. I did sharpen this one, but man, it still takes some force to push it through the leather. I found some very affordable options that were much better, like this Comovan craft one off Amazon that has polished stainless steel prongs that slide into the leather a lot smoother and slide out of the leather a lot smoother. And that allows for a much faster workflow. And it's quite affordable. There's a few of those Amazon brands. I think a lot of them are also on Etsy. Artisan is another one. I have a few of those Artisan stitching irons as well. There are a couple companies that make some really high-end versions of these stitching irons. One is KS Blade, that's pretty popular. I think that's a Korean company, and they make some very fine quality stitching irons. Another one is Cinnabog, which seems to be a pretty popular brand that has a really nice brass handle that allows you to kind of put your fingers on top of the chisel and get a bit more accuracy. So if I was just starting out again, I wouldn't mess with the sewing awl. I would skip using this for most of my projects and go straight to using a stitching iron. And if I could only get one size to start out with, I'd probably get something in stainless steel like this with smooth prongs that will be a little bit easier to work with. And I would probably get a 5mm because I think that's a good balance between the length of your stitch and how nice it looks. You start to get too far apart and it can look a little bit more cheesy, and you start to get close together and it becomes very tedious. So 5mm, maybe 4. If you could get a set of 4-prong and 2-prong, the 2-prong will allow you to go around corners, and basically you can make anything with those 2 chisels. I got to a point where I naturally wanted to figure out how I might be able to use these chisels more efficiently. One of the challenges is keeping them straight when you hit them with a mallet so that your holes go nice and even and straight down into your workpiece. That can be a challenge. The other challenge is just the repetition of smacking this with the hammer, putting the hammer down, working the chisel back out, aligning it to the next spot on your workpiece, smacking it with a hammer again. So to me, increasing the efficiency involved some kind of press or the ability to press this chisel down into the workpiece repeatedly at a 90-degree angle. So that's where I started looking for solutions to that problem. That eventually led me to the 3-ton Vevor Arbor press. I felt like for the money it was the best solution that allowed me to attach my stitching chisels without any modification. And it also gave me the option to use a lot of other tools like snap setters and even cutting dies and some of those things that require a heavy press. The 3-ton press, I think when I got it was in about the $300 range. I think it might be a little bit more expensive now. There's not a lot of heavy duty options in that price range. You know, and if you go American made Arbor press, you're talking about close to $1,000 probably for a press that's smaller than the 3-ton one I got from Vevor. So this seemed like a good solution to me, and it has worked really well for me. It allows me to get very consistent holes punched at the right angle without pounding away with my hammer, which actually changes the whole feeling with which you are doing your sewing. It just makes it feel a lot smoother, quieter, calmer, and I really think it was a good progression for me. There's a company called Dream Factory out of Korea that makes a really nice press that's a lot smaller than the 3-ton Arbor press that can also do hot foil stamping. You can put a plate on there and do cutting dies. You can put an attachment to do your stitching awls and set rivets and other things like that as well. That I think is a very high quality tool. It just costs around $1,000, maybe $1,200. It was just a little too expensive for me. I actually think there's a niche in the market for something a little bit nicer than the Vevor press, but not as expensive as the Dream Factory press that's made in Korea. I think if you could find a solution in the $500 to $700 range that's fairly heavy duty, that can accommodate stitching irons, stamps, rivet setters, some of those other tools that require pressure, I think you would get a lot of business. If you know of something that you think would work better than the Arbor press, but it's cheaper than $1,200, put it in the comments. I'd like to know. Now, I was sure that the next step in my progression to up my productivity and quality of my work was a sewing machine. So I started searching for options for sewing machines, and I found a whole new world that I could do a whole separate video on. But for the purposes of this video, just know that there is no one-size-fits-all sewing machine. There is no one machine out there that you can get that's going to do all the different types of leather projects that you want to do. The other thing I learned is that most of these machines are actually built in China. There's not many, maybe any options that I know of built in the United States. Now, a lot of these companies are United States owned and run. Leather Machine Company, Cowboy, Texo, what's some of the other ones? Sailrite. They're all using machines that are produced probably in the same region, if not the same factory in China. And they're high quality machines, but they do take work. You're gonna have to mess with it. You're gonna have to fine tune it. You're probably gonna have to fix it at some point. You're gonna have to adjust it to what you want. And it might take a while for you to produce the quality of work that you want to produce with the sewing machine. So you got to keep that in mind if you're thinking about making that leap. And it's a big leap. We're talking about going from a $300 Arbor press to a $2,000 to $3,000 sewing machine. It's a big investment, and it probably is not going to solve the problems that you think it's going to solve, in my experience. Another thing that I found with the sewing machine is that it doesn't look as nice as hand stitching. I know that might be a matter of opinion, but in my opinion, you cannot make a sewing machine look as nice as hand stitching. I kind of thought you would be able to, or at least get it close enough that it was passable, but I actually ended up going back to hand sewing my sheaths because I didn't feel like my customers would be satisfied with the change in the aesthetic quality and probably the durability of my sheaths if I switched to sewing them all with the sewing machine. However, if you need to put a lot of stitches in something, if you're making things like bags, a sewing machine might be the only option for you and the best option for you. I made these 3 bags for my kids at Christmas last year, and there's no way I ever would have been able to get this done by hand sewing. And the type of sewing that I was doing actually fit the aesthetic of what the sewing machine produces, and I think that's the sweet spot for a sewing machine. So if you're producing a lot of items like this, or you want to produce a lot of items like this, you probably need to start thinking about how you can get to where you have a sewing machine. The next tool I'm going to talk about actually probably did more for my sewing than any of the other tools that I've talked about so far, and that's the laser engraver. The laser engraver I have is an enclosed 40-watt laser from Creality. It's the Falcon Pro version. It has probably affected my productivity and the quality of my work more than the other tools that I've mentioned so far, because it just opens up so many opportunities. You're able to put the stitching holes in your workpiece very evenly, very consistently, and very repeatably. These are files that I have saved on my computer that I can cut out on the laser anytime I want. I probably wouldn't even have made these digital files if I didn't have the laser, but now that I have them, they are such an asset to me, and I didn't expect that part of having the laser engraver. The stitching, I think, looks really nice. I'm able to get the hand-stitched aesthetic with an advanced level of production and precision that I would not otherwise be able to achieve. The laser also just gives you so many other options. You don't have to have cutting dies. You can cut holes out right in the middle of your workpiece. You can cut different shapes out. One of the most tedious parts about production leathercraft is cutting stuff out over and over and over again. And the laser makes such a huge difference with that without having to store cutting dies or have a big clicker press or anything like that. If I was going to recommend a tool in the $1,500 to $3,000 price range, I would recommend a laser engraver before a sewing machine, unless you're into making bags. I want to take just a minute to talk about thread and needles, because this has been something that has also evolved over time with me. When I first started, I thought I had to have the biggest needles, and somebody told me that the only thread that you could really use for saddle stitching was artificial sinew. And so I used this artificial sinew stuff for a long time. It is easy to split with the needle when you're threading the needle. But it's also a mess and hard to get consistent looking stitches. So I actually ended up kind of moving away from this over time. The thread that I use almost exclusively now is from Main Thread Company, and it's a braided waxed thread that is a synthetic material, which I like because it allows me to melt the ends. And it's just a really high quality, really consistent thread. The stitches look really nice with it. They have lots of color options, and you can split it with the needle really easily when you're threading the needle to do a saddle stitch. If someone gave me $1,200 or $1,500 and said, right now, go choose a tool that you want for your leather work, I might look at that Dream Factory press. It's just so beautiful. It's such a nice piece of work. It seems so heavy duty. I might also consider some of Weaver's Master Tool line. They've got some nice tools. They're just so expensive, you know. If you got $1,200 or $1,500 right now, what would you buy? What's the first thing you would get? What would it look like? But one thing is for sure, that this craft has an entry barrier of almost zero. You don't have to wait to spend $1,200 to start leatherworking. Just get out there, get a few basic tools and start building stuff and have a blast. You're gonna get so much satisfaction if you can just not worry about perfection. Don't worry if you're not 100% efficient. Don't worry if it takes you a little extra time. Just try building some things. Start your own journey and your own evolution, and you'll be surprised. I'm hoping that this video can help you guys maybe skip some of the steps that I had to go through, get you that much further in your journey, that much faster, and have you building things looking really nice, really quick. I've sure enjoyed this craft, and I've got a lot of satisfaction out of building things out of leather. I think it's one of the most satisfying mediums that you can work with, although sometimes very challenging. If you liked this video, if you got something out of it, hit the like button, maybe subscribe. I think that helps. I don't really know if it does or not, but maybe it does. It probably will help me in the algorithm, and I could use it because I wonder what the hell I'm doing on YouTube. And then I just have to remind myself, I just love this craft and working with leather, and that's something that YouTube has allowed me to do at a level that I probably wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. So that's why I'm here. But your support does matter to me, and I look forward to hopefully seeing you on the next one.